Government is steamrolling as far as bills is concerned, much later in the course of the program. But remember, today it is Wednesday, and every Wednesday we have, of course, On Target, where we have a sweeping scope on what is happening as far as security and diplomacy is concerned. We take a look what is happening here in the country, regionally also, and the entire world. So our guests already here in studio, we shall be also crossing over to them to have just a wider scope on what is really happening as far as the Omicron is concerned, with its spread that is also giving, the World Health experts a niggling worry as well. And also we shall be looking at just what happened last week with the Summit for Democracy. What are some of the lowdowns that are highlighted there? We'll be joined by Dr. Peter Biar-Ajak, all the way from Washington, to tell us more on what will be, or what he actually gleaned from that particular summit, because he participated as well. And later we shall be looking at the disaster management in this country and what is currently happening. Something that has been exercising my mind. We have now Tomo Kwach, whose reports on what is happening under that rubble remain scanty, and efforts both from the county and the national government have not been very fascinating and also inspiring hope. Resources have been scanty, and it seems the world, and not even the world, but Kenya at large, is not really concerned on what is really happening in Bondo, Siaya, as far as lives is concerned. If it were other nationalities, other countries, the fact that we have one life that is threatened, the government will mobilize all their resources to save that one life. But here, we can see the attitude has been very, at most, cavalier. And this is what we'll be discussing with our panelists also this morning. All right, let's go and see what is fresh off the press this morning. Headlining our dailies, we have the Standard, and this is what it is on the front page of the Standard today. New party backs Raila, cautions Mudavadi is a splash today. ODM leader's quest for presidency got a boost after a breakaway faction from Senator Moses Wetangula's Ford Kenya party backed him and urged ANC leader to join the team if he wants to be part of the next government. That is what we have today as a splash on the front page of the Standard. The story is tucked away on page 6 of the Standard this morning. And we can see Democratic Action Party of Kenya leader Wafula Munyinyi, Agriculture CS Peter Munya, Defense CS Eugene Wamala, and Ugunja MP Opiyo Wandayi at the Bomas of Kenya yesterday, where there was a launch of Democratic Action Party. That story, you'll find it inside the Standard as well today. Also, court orders Kinoti's arrest over gang saga is another story that you want to follow on page 3 of the Standard today. Lack of funds kills dreams of regional blocks. If you may just scroll up there, you can see from the teaser there is a special report on page 10 and 11 of the Standard this morning. Lack of funds kills dreams of regional blocks. That is a story that you want to follow inside the Standard this morning. Idle Nyanza youth join terror gangs is another story on page 21. Fuel subsidy to the rescue of Kenyans. That story continues on page 29 of the Standard, the business segment. Also, a data defense decision on Uba Binyang. You can follow that story on page 48, the sports segment inside the Standard today. Also, judge stops state order on COVID jab. LCS had directed that any Kenyan seeking government services must be fully vaccinated by December 21st and show certificate. We'll follow the story on page 4 of the Standard, and also it shall be part of a discussion this morning, looking at the wider picture as well on how the world is treating Omicron, as it were. So we will follow that story on page 4 of the Standard. Let's see what the Daily Nation is holding for us, and this is what you're waking up to on the front page of the Daily Nation today. Return of retirees is a splash today. It says contrast. The flag there reads in 2019. House passed motion to reduce retirement age to 55 years, with proponents citing need to create jobs. So we have geriatric bill, which largely addresses welfare of the elderly, proposes rehiring of pensioners In critical services like health, national security and education, the proposed law is likely to revive debate on keeping retired professionals in employment as qualified young Kenyans languish in the streets. This, of course, is bound to stoke a lot of debate, and the story is well fleshed out for you on page 6 of the Daily Nation this morning. Also, students gone rogue. A disturbing trend is spreading across schools where learners are increasingly seizing control from authorities and dictating how schools are run, including deciding whether to stay at school or go home. A spot check by Nation indicates that many principals have at one time or another been held to ransom by some rogue learners who insist on having their way. You can follow that story on page 7 of the Daily Nation. Also, still on the front page of the Daily Nation, Uhuru Raila strategy for Grand Coalition. The law, the Current Political Parties Act, spells out 2 instances that shall apply to a member of a party being deemed to have resigned. One is where a member, it says, quote unquote, in any way or manner publicly advocates for the formation of another political party. The other is where he or she promotes the ideology, interest or policies of another party. That story, you have it on page 4 of Daily Nation today. Let's see what we have on the front page of The Star, and this is what you're waking up to on the front page of The Star this morning. I'm trying to just load it up for you. There you have MPs, county bosses to get huge pay rise. It says SRC's pay plan due for public participation. That is the flag on top there. Lawmakers' salary to increase by 88,750, while that of CECs to jump by 45,000 shillings. County speakers by 375,000 shillings. And this story continues on page 4 and 5 of The Star this morning. Let's see what the People Daily is holding for us. And this is what you have on the front page of the People Daily this morning. Well, I'm loading up that. We have the Business Daily for you. This is what is on the front page of the Business Daily. French lender EcoBank sees Mumias from KCB is what is on the front page of the Business Daily. EcoBank and Propaco forcibly take over ethanol plant and power generation units over a combined 3.9 billion shillings debt. Pan-African lender EcoBank and French development financier Propaco have seized the prime assets of Mumia's sugar company from KCB Group, setting the stage for a vicious court battle that could throw the planned leasing of the ailing miller into disarray. That is what we have there. Also, another 113 million shillings sent to student by boyfriend frozen. More than 108.2 million shillings linked to a 21-year-old Nairobi Technical Institute student, and an associate has been frozen of suspicion that it is process of crime, bringing the total amount blocked to 210 million shillings. This story continues on page 4 of the Business Daily this morning. There is also this particular launch of a book that we have there, Tax Czar Memoir, National Assembly Majority Leader Amos Kimunya with the former Kenya Revenue Authority Commissioner General Michael Waweru, his wife Jerry Waweru, and Kiari Kamau, the CEO of East African Educational Publishers, at the launch of Mr. Waweru's autobiography titled Kenya's Tax Czar yesterday. Also, oil companies get 8 billion shillings for unchanged fuel prices. You can follow this story on page 4 of the Business Daily. All right, let's move on and see what we have also on the national Swahili paper. That is Taifa Leo, and this is what you're waking up to on the front page of Taifa Leo this morning. Mrithi wa Uhuru kubeba zigo zito, it says. Mrithi wa Uhuru kubeba zigo zito. And all those burdens are enumerated there, 7 of them. You can grab a copy of that and read it. Let's cross over to Rwanda and see what is holding the front page of the New Times in Rwanda. And this is what you're waking up to on the front page of the New Times in Rwanda. Expo host DR Congo Mozambique Pavilion. Expo host DR Congo Mozambique Pavilion. The annual trade fair has brought together over 400 exhibitors from 66 countries. You can follow the story on page 3 of the New Times. We cross over now to Wall Street and see what the Wall Street Journal is holding for us. And this is what we have on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Rescue efforts continue after deadly weekend tornadoes. And you can see the devastation there. That picture is very telling. And labor crunch spurs hospitals to drop vaccine requirements. Labor crunch spurs hospitals to drop vaccine requirements. Even there, that vaccine mandate is a big debate as well. Here also we saw the intervention of the courts yesterday, and that particular deadline that was looming of the 21st, that if you're not vaccinated, then you cannot really access government services, now is postponed, as it were, because of this particular intervention by the courts. So we'll see how that really pans out. But still, we shall be gravitating deeper with our discussion with our panelists much later in the course of the program. All right, let's see what we have also inside the editorial pages, looking at the editorial cartoons. And we begin with what we do have in the Standard. I'll flip over there. I don't have my soft copy with me, but of course you shall have it momentarily up there. And it's all about this vaccination. Even as we're heading towards the Christmas holidays, it says at this rate, he will be soon needed, or he will soon need to be vaccinated. And that is, you know, the baby who is laying in the manger there, Jesus Christ, right? Because the world is calling for everyone to be vaccinated right now because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's see what Victor has drawn for us, inside for us in the Daily Nation. And this is what we have on the editorial page of the Daily Nation today. It's all about the universities and what is happening right now. We're still playing the violin, but the ship is sinking. We have Moi University, which is sinking. We have JQRT sinking. And you may remember, of course, the Emperor of Rome. While Rome was burning, he was just playing his violin, right? And this is what is happening. We're still playing our violin here, while our institutions of higher learning are in deplorable situation as far as their finances is concerned. And this is what Victor has captured for you inside the Daily Nation today. Right, let's see what Ozone has drawn for us inside the Star. And this is what is on their editorial page this morning. No pressure, it's voluntary. But of course, the pressure is real. And that is what Ozone has drawn for us inside the People Daily. Inside the Star, actually, that is the Star. But his Stano is up next. And this is what we have inside the People Daily. The box is moving away. Where is gender equality? This is all about 2022 politics. That is what we have inside the People Daily today, the editorial page. Right, I just want to hear what we have from our panelists. Hamid Hashi is joining us this morning. Also, we have Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, who is with us this morning, the chairman of Equity Bank. And we shall be joined also much later in the course of the program by Dr. Simeon Sungi, who is a lecturer at the United USIU. It normally gives me trouble just pronouncing the whole name of it. That is USIU. He's a lecturer there, Department of Criminal Justice. He'll be joining us much later. And all the way from Washington, we have also Dr. Peter Biarajak, who is the Executive Director of Revive Sudan. We shall be discussing much more on what happened last week on the Summit for Democracy, and also looking at what is happening regionally as far as security diplomacy and peace is concerned. But let me just hear from them if they're ready. They woke up early, so I want just to have them give us their introductory remarks and also just weigh in also on the cartoons as well, especially on Ozon's cartoon in light of what really happened yesterday with the suspension by the courts on the vaccine mandate. The deadline was 21st of this month. Good morning to you, Hashi. Good morning to you, Erastus Muncha.
Good morning, Deval.
Yes.
Nice
Good morning.
Good. Let's just begin with that particular editorial cartoon in the Star. And of course, I'll run a story on this development. And this will just act as a segue to a discussion on what is happening in the world right now with the Omicron spread, which is a niggling worry for everyone. And the government also has warned that if we do not comply with the Ministry of Health protocols as far as COVID-19 is concerned, then we might be having another lockdown looming. So we need to take precaution. We need to be cautious as well. But that editorial cartoon as well, maybe that has been a very ticklish debate on whether you should force Kenya, shoehorn them to be vaccinated, or someone can do it out of their own volition. Hashi.
I think that there are times when the writ of the government ought to be obeyed, especially in a public health crisis. And this is precisely the time where the government's writ citizens ought to obey, because the public health environment is at risk. Everybody ought to be inoculated. Everybody has to get a shot. And it is the responsibility of the government to provide those shots in an easy, accessible way, because transmission is from person to person. So if you try and if you reject to be inoculated, you have every right as a human being to reject something as far as your freedom is concerned. But when it starts to interfere with someone else's freedom, well, that's where your freedom ends. And therefore, in my view, the idea that the government is forcing people to get injections is ludicrous. If you don't have an injection, it means you're going to give people COVID-19. And a basic science in biology high school, if I can remember my biology high school, is that everybody has to be inoculated. If only a partial group is inoculated and the other group is not inoculated, then what happens is, what is happening now is that this virus starts changing, starts becoming like the Omicron, the one that everybody is scared of from South Africa. And one of the things that I want to condemn in an unparalleled way is the way in which access to the COVID-19 vaccine is going on. Maybe only 10% of Africa is inoculated. You saw the other day Cyril Ramaphosa, president of the South African Union, got the flu. He got the COVID-19 again, even though he was inoculated. So at the base of this, Debal, Africa has to come together and build its own vaccine. We can't keep relying on a racist West. The Americans and the Europeans selfishly hoarding their vaccines and doing it on their own way, and they have every right to do that. They created the vaccine, they made it. We in Africa need to have the brains, we have the people who could do this. We need to create the institutions like Paul Kagame is trying to do in Rwanda. So the government is quite right in saying that Kenyans need to be vaccinated, but the responsibility of the government to provide the vaccines in a way that is easily accessible, plus the government ought to give out information about the vaccine, so that the people who are skeptics, vaccine skeptics, can take the vaccine.
Thank you. Ambassador Erastus Moicho, thank you for joining us on Morning Prime today. Also in your capacity as the Executive Chair of the African Capacity Building Foundation. Yes, I know this is something that you've been keen on, especially with the development in South Africa, and this is bound to come and sweep, down to East Africa as well. Preparedness and this intervention by the courts as well. What would you make out of it?
I thank you, Debal, and it's good to see you, my brother, here. It's been a long time when we used to meet when you were on the other side, and so happy to meet you. Debal, if you look at the COVID response worldwide and even in Africa has been pathetic. And this is really surprising because this is not the first pandemic that the world has encountered. You remember that in 2014 we had Ebola. And since Ebola, the world had developed a rule book.
Thank you, Doctor.
Even, of course, in how pandemics were handled centuries before, on how to manage pandemics. But if anything has happened about, COVID, it has shown the world of how not to approach a pandemic. Because in a pandemic, there are three questions you ask yourself. First is, what is the mode of transmission? What is the impact? Which institutions are going to involve? What resources do you need? And how do you mitigate against this spread? And so the question you ask about preparedness, it is as if the world was unprepared, yet the rule books exist, and the response was pathetic. Even when you talk about the uptake of vaccine, the reluctance is because of the way in which the so-called West approached it, because when it came out, instead of approaching the issue, they used this as a fodder for geopolitics and so lost it. And the theories were developed around the world about the origin and the impact it would have, the vaccine that it would have, and this has continued to misinform the world. And so there is a really challenge. What emanated from the poor leadership globally is also still playing out locally. But as Asha said, there is science, and it is very clear that people are vaccinated, they get less impact in terms of when there's an onset of COVID, in terms of hospitalization, but also fatalities. And so the government has done the best to explain that, I must say. The leadership was very good. In fact, Kenya and Africa showed a very clear leadership. It's just that they didn't have means in terms of explaining to the people, coming forward every day to give statistics, but also in terms of mitigation measures. But I think the challenge has always been the capacity. As Asha said, Africa, we have had really what you might call pandemic apathetism, where the world coiled to nationalism. Those that with capacities, because your question you also asked the issue of capacity, were able to produce and hoard these vaccines, forgetting that when this disease strikes, it has no boundaries, it has no color, it has no limitations. And so if COVID is in Africa, it will spread to the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And so they ignored those elements that they can only be safe when we are all safe. And that's why this pandemic is going to be with us for a long time. But I think going forward, which is the question you really ask, is for Africa now to develop that capacity. Capacity to produce, capacity to do research and development, but also capacity in terms of human resources. And we must then develop a continent-wide framework, at least for Africa, like Europe did, so that we act together. And I think this is exactly what Africa has done in a small scale. I remember when I was at the African Union in 2014, and the pandemic, Ebola struck, we were involved. And the rest of the world, under the Obama administration, there was global leadership. And we then developed a mechanism to support the region where it was, to contain it, but also to support it with the capacity to manage it, which was missing in this case. And from there on, Africa then developed the Center for Disease Control, Africa CDC, which is a capacity institution to see what Africa has, coordinate in terms of testing the pathogens, giving information out, but also developing protocols for that. Unfortunately, there was lack, particularly in terms of the vaccines, and this is the challenge that continues to face the continent, and also the capacity to do research and come up with structures that can then distribute them. We now have countries that can do it, and I think going forward, this should be a wake-up call for Africa to develop capacity for its own issues, not necessarily COVID, but also other issues.
All right. Okay, before we go to Dr. Biara Jack in Washington, maybe just to update you on what is really happening so far as the research is concerned. The Omicron variant is offering more hints about what it may have in store as it spreads around the globe. And we know a highly transmissible virus that may cause less severe disease and one that can be slowed but not stopped by today's vaccines. An analysis on Tuesday of data from South Africa, where the new variant is driving a surge in infections, suggests that Pfizer vaccine offers less defense against infections from Omicron and reduced but still good protection from hospitalization. The findings are preliminary and have not been peer-reviewed. The gold standard in scientific research has revealed this, but they line up with other early data about Omicron's behavior, including that it seems to be more easily spread from person to person. The spread can be seen in Britain, the United States, and Denmark, where confirmed Omicron cases are increasing at a worrisome pace. That is according to Dr. Jacob Lemieux, who monitors variants from a research collaboration led by Harvard Medical School. It's unclear whether Omicron's rapid spread will overwhelm hospitals. In South Africa, although case numbers are rising, hospitals admissions for adults diagnosed with COVID-19 are at 29% lower compared to the wave the country experienced in mid-2020. After adjusting for vaccination status, according to the new analysis. I just want to hear what is happening in the United States as far as this development is concerned. And also, we'll discuss about the vaccine inequity and ostracization that comes with it as well. South African President, that is Ramaphosa, was at the summit on security and peace in Senegal, and he highlighted his frustration from especially the Western countries on how they treated South Africa. But before we head there and listen from his bite, let's just also cross over to Washington right now and hear from Peter Biara. Good morning. I know it is in the evening right there at the United States. Thank you nonetheless for joining us. First of all, your reaction, and how is it also in the United States? How are you treating this Omicron virus?
Well, thank you very much, Dubal, for having me. It's always a pleasure to join you and to have this conversation. The Omicron virus is proving to be spreading much, much quicker than anything that we have seen before. Here in the U.S., the death toll continued to rise. I think it has reached something like 800,000 here since the pandemic began. And it seems the numbers with the Omicron are more or less doubling every 2-3 days. Just show you how fast the virus is growing. And it's kind of like going to make again what happened with Delta, where within a very short time, Delta was able to replace all the different variances of COVID. So that seemed to be the case with Omicron. Of course, the administration here is arguing that vaccines are the best way to protect oneself from the virus. And recently, the CDC and the FDA have authorized a booster for anyone over 18 who is willing to take it. But at the same time, the main problem here in America is that there is a controversy and there is a growing movement of people that don't want to take the vaccine. And at the same time, people that don't want masks. So the issue has become extremely politicized, divisive. And although the U.S. has the tools and the resources to counter the virus, it doesn't have the political consensus that is required for the people to have faith in the instruments that the government is putting forward. So it's really a bizarre situation here, which is a bit different than our situation in many African countries, because here, if you want a vaccine, whether it is a booster or just to get your first shot, you get it. But many people don't want to get it because they're against the vaccine or they're misled by disinformation or misinformation that they're hearing online. So it's a very interesting situation, really. But overall, I think this issue of COVID now, like I'm telling you from what I'm hearing, it seems there has been already over 1,000 different variances. And even the variances that we are talking about are the only ones that are very serious and the ones that are spreading quickly. So it seems like a virus that is really not going anywhere. And from the numbers that I was looking at, how it is projected that even for Africa to vaccinate just 40% of its population is going to take up to 2024. And by then, who knows how many different variances will be developed by then. So I think it's something that people need to begin adjusting and thinking that we may have to live with this, and thinking of mechanism and ways in which societies can be prepared to resume normal life despite the pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Peter Bierujak. Now, I just want to introduce that particular bite by Ramaphosa on that particular summit on peace and security that happened last week in Senegal, and this is what he's had to say, his frustration on how the Omicron variant revelation from South Africa was treated. Listen in.
And access to vaccines. I don't want to belabor this point too much about the waiver at the WTO, but I do want to make the point that, and let me start it off maybe with the issue of partnerships. And I think my brother Charles Michel spoke about partnerships. As Africans, we would like partnerships to be based on mutual respect. And we are the first to say we want to have a good and effective and enduring partnership with Europe and indeed with others as well. But quite often we find that there is a bit of paternalism that underpins the relationship between us. I'll give you a very good example. After Omicron was announced, I was due to travel to West Africa. And in traveling in the wake of Omicron, I received calls from the 4 presidents that I was going to travel to, President Macky Sall, Buhari, Ouattara, as well as Akufo-Addo. And they said, we've heard about this Omicron. Are you still coming? We want you to come. What can we do to help? And I said, President, if you still relax about our coming, we are coming. A plane load of us, together with journalists, we got on the way. Before I left, I also got some calls from Europe. And the calls were so paternalistic. They were saying, hello, President Ramaphosa, we've heard about this Omicron. I am sorry to tell you that we are banning travel to Europe from South Africa and Southern Africa. No discussion, no attempt to hear what our views are. And I'm saying that the relationship needs to be mutually respectful. We need to respect one another. The African presidents respected me as we respect one another. But from Europe, I just got a message of saying, we've banned travel, thank you, goodbye, see you next time. That's not the way to conduct relationship. So there needs to be consensus, there needs to be discussion. And I want to talk about the issue of access to vaccines. We have made a proposal which is supported by more than 100 countries. And what we have said is, we want, and this comes back to what the youth were saying as well, they want to know whether they have a continent which will help to develop their skills, where they can thrive. But what do we want? We want to be able to make our own vaccines. And we will deal with the issue of reluctance for our Africans to take vaccines. But we want to make vaccines. We don't just want to fill and finish and package, which is what we are being offered. That we want you to build a capacity to fill, finish, and package, and we will send you the drug substance. And we say, no, we want you to relax the intellectual property rights for a while so that we can make the drug substance, because we have the capability.
Yeah, President Ramaphosa there really exposing how the Omicron variant has been treated in South Africa. And I was just highlighting the ostracization that really comes with this as well. And we saw even the Director General of World Health Organization, vilifying some of the nations that are castigating of South Africa because of this revelation, as it were. But you can see the treatment that he got truly, and how he's showcasing the African solidarity in light of what is happening with the spread as well. Let's just pick your brains as well, Ahmed Hashi.
Well, Tabal, I think that it's pathetic that African leaders are talking about the obvious hypocrisy of Europe as far as the vaccine is concerned. I think we ought to stop this mental system that we have, in which we keep trying to make sense to the Europeans or to the Americans, or pleading to them about what we should or should not do. The American vaccine was made by an African-American woman. The European vaccine was made by a Turkish couple. The world is very interdependent. But the problem is that these states, when they get this vaccine and they get this intellectual property rights, they become selfish. And we ought to know that at the end of the day, we don't have a shortcut. South Africa is the most advanced state in Africa today. It should have the capacity within 90 days to create its own vaccine and then give it to the rest of its sisterly countries in this continent. Kenya, as I've said, has got some of the top geneticists working here in the Ministry of Health. If there's an African-wide meeting on creating an African vaccine, and name it, say, the Mandela vaccine, I think that we don't have to speak to Europe. We don't need to talk to them about banning flights and not banning flights. We have to take responsibility for our lives. We have to accept that African lives matter. And the reason they matter, Debal, is that we have now, it's an open secret that the Americans and the Europeans act in a certain way. They have acted in this certain way historically. We need to understand that and stop trying to plead the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There is no Declaration of Human Rights. These states have certain interests. They have their own rational interests. We need to have our own rational interests. And if a president like Cyril Ramaphosa can sit in front of us and tell us that we want Europe to give us, to relax the intellectual property rights, they're not going to relax the intellectual property rights. What brain science does it take about to take a sample of someone in Cape Town or in Nairobi or in Lagos and looking at the vaccine and using the geneticists and the doctors that we have in this continent to make a vaccine? Some of the best doctors in the world, Debal, are from Africa. They're working in the US and working in Europe. Does the 52 governments in this country or the African Union then have the capacity to call them and pay them 3 times what they're being paid and say, get us a vaccine in 90 days? We need leadership in this continent. We just can't keep putting our hands under a begging bowl. Debal, I put it to you that it's time for Africa to rise up and do its own thing.
Indeed. Right, we'll circle back with you, Ambassador, momentarily. We just need to take a short break and also hear from Dr. Peter Biarritz in light of what Ramaphosa has just revealed as well. When we're talking about vaccine ostracization and vaccine nationalism as well. So don't go away, much more on the other side of the break.
KTN News. Get the whole story. Fried ginger has ginger oil, which is good for a healthy living lifestyle. It combines wonderfully on salads, stir-fries, when basted on roasted meat or simply sprinkled on your favorite dish. Available in 250 ml, 500 ml and 1 liter.
We are living in a time where everything is happening almost simultaneously. From the good to the bad, to the downright ugly and everything else that is great.
Manchester United, who will be playing against Aston Villa.
It is thus our duty to be there, whenever and wherever, to bring you the exclusives as they happen, plus all the backstories. Our determination drives us to become the newsbreakers, driven by our passion to be the risk takers.
I can choose to go to my home anytime I want.
Who make KTN News your go-to for the whole story every day.
The stories she had heard of children living with sickle cell disease.
This week, Culture Quest, we are in Savo West National Park.
As a leading news station in Kenya, we believe it is all about what we do and how we do it. That is why we give it our all to bring you nothing but the best.
Ikiwa ni sauti ya mwananchi.
And the truth, while we are at it, we do it for passion, love, and the health of our country. KTN News, get the whole story.
You can also get the whole story on KTN News YouTube channel. Jione YouTube na Tenbob, because *544*20# Leo. Fried ginger has ginger oil, which is good for a healthy living lifestyle. It combines wonderfully on salads, stir-fries, when basted on roasted meat or simply sprinkled on your favorite dish. Available in 250 ml, 500 ml and 1 liter. Every game, set and match will be bigger and better than ever before. With our star-studded team, Bernardo Tieno, James Wakabi, Ken Chege. A night full of facts, analysis, and sport culture from all over Africa.
Well, I know there are policies that support persons with disability, but in action we are yet to go far. So for me, is that the government should also ensure that whatever they've said is implemented on the grassroots.
KTN News. Get the whole story.
Welcome back. You're watching On Target here on Morning Prime, where we get and look at what is happening as far as the security is concerned, diplomacy and international affairs. And of course, we are following what the Omicron spread is doing right now, spreading rapidly around the world and causing a lot of devastation. One person has already died because of a COVID-related case in Britain. We want to hear from you, Peter Biara Jack, in light of what Ramaphosa was talking about, vaccine nationalism, vaccine ostracization, South Africa being picked on this because they revealed the Omicron variant.
Absolutely. You know, I like to say about what President Ramaphosa is pointing out is a very critical issue. And I'm glad that he's doing so, because it requires voices like these to talk about this and to talk candidly about what he was hearing. Because there is all this pretense that we are hearing that this is a global pandemic, we are in this together, it affects us all together. But when you see the actions that countries are taking, these actions are determined by self-interest. And it's about each country looking out for its own and for its people. And that is not going to help the world to overcome the crisis that we are in now, because clearly, as my colleague mentioned before, we are now in a world that is interdependent, where these kind of challenges are very interconnected and they require global solution, because the problems are global in nature. So the fact that he's being told what he's being told is concerning. And we have all seen how the reaction was even here in the US, with the initial reaction being to put a ban or to block people from moving. And as I mentioned earlier, there are so many different variances that are happening. This virus is literally mutating very fast. I don't think there is any sense that we will ever catch up with it, the way that it is mutating and the way that it takes time to do logistics and to move things and to vaccinate people. So it's going to require people really giving certain things up. And I think through this pandemic, we are going to learn about whether indeed this shared global concerns and global problem, will there really be a global solution? Because the other thing that we are also seeing now is climate change, and we are going to see more and more of that. But if we are unable to provide relaxed things like intellectual property right, so that vaccines can be made to get to everyone, or the therapeutics are made widely available, that's going to be very telling. So I'm hoping that these conversations continue. And I'm glad that it's showing that there is the capacity in Kenya, in South Africa, in Rwanda, and Nigeria, and all the countries that he mentioned. So this debate needs to happen, and we don't need to give up on it, because it's a challenge that we face, and we can all benefit from everybody relaxing and being in this together.
Much. Let's hear from Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, because we have right now the Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros Ghebreyesus, saying that the reality that Omicron is probably in most countries is real, that if we've not, announced any infection in the country, that is lacking in the corner. He says that the reality is that Omicron is probably in most countries, even if it has not been detected. And he says vaccines alone will not protect against Omicron. And he's calling on countries to mask. Social distancing should be there. Proper ventilation and hand hygiene to prevent the contagion. We're back to factory settings, even when most people right now are really relaxing as far as this protocol is concerned. But also reaction on Ramaphosa?
Thank you, Dubal, again. And it's good to see Peter. You remember how you and the rest of us really prayed for and advocated for Peter's release. And it's good to see him. President Ramaphosa is spot on. He has raised really 4 key points. One of them, of course, has to do with the issue of intellectual property.
Good.
Now, even if you have capacity, you will still be restricted to produce that vaccine if you don't have the property right. And of course, the property right costs money. And what the world did, particularly during the time of AIDS, the rest of the world, particularly Africa, went to WTO and sought a waiver. And at that point, the world was more understanding, and so the waiver was granted. And that's why countries like India started to develop their capacities that they are now using today. And of course, Kenya was one of those countries that really provided leadership at the WTO to secure that waiver. At the moment, there is this reluctance at the WTO. And I think it's because, as Peter said, and you also said it in your intro, that there is this, COVID nationalism. And the people have thought that this is an opportunity, first of all, to retreat to very destructive nationalism and also make a political gain, but also economic windfall, forgetting that this is really a danger to all humankind globally. And so President Ramaphosa is spot on. The WTO, we must see that willingness at the level of the WTO. Africa should also be learning from here on this example, because I remember during the negotiations of the Doha round of the WTO, countries like France and the rest making big capital out of things like wine, where they were telling us you cannot use the name champagne and all that. I mean, those are not things really one cares about, but they were protecting the name, even the name, not even the scientific aspect. Now, Africa has a lot of resources. If you look at Africa in terms of the mineral resources, today, the cobalt, 70% of the cobalt for producing these batteries that would mitigate against things like global warming is in Africa. Yet it is taken out of Africa, processed in the West, and you don't see the name Africa appearing anywhere. I mean, if you take even some of the products from out of Africa, whether it's your coffee, your tea, and name it, no one protects Africa's intellectual property. But they are very keen to protect the intellectual property of the things they own. And so this is, again, as I said, and one cannot stress it enough, a wake-up call for Africa. The second point that President Ramaphosa has raised has to do with disruptions of supply and travel challenges. Because of poor coordination, there was selectivity, which was very clinically implemented by the West, targeting countries. In fact, it was used as a tool to punish those countries that they didn't see as friendly and the rest in terms of denying them vaccine access, but also travel. Again, this is, as Peter's just said, a global issue requires a global solution. You cannot implement this kind of issue partially. And yet this is the approach you see, that there was poor coordination, but also implementation has been very partial. And so, yes, I think we go back to the drawing board and ask ourselves, what is it that we should do? The third point that you have raised, Dibal, is how do you go about in meeting the challenges? Because you said there are all those mandates which have come out, wearing masks, keeping your distance, washing your hands, and the rest. But this is really to stop the spread. The long-term effect is then to address how you stop the disease itself from being a pandemic so that you can contain it. And the only way then you do is, of course, through science and through vaccine and developing, the necessary remedial measures. But of course, in terms of spreading, you have seen, especially now that we are in a political season, campaign season, this spread is going to continue. And we are also coming to a festive season. So here again, the Minister of Health should come forward, give clear indications as they have done in the past, but also try to contain this, because if you see the jump that has happened, as you highlighted, from 6 to 11, you don't know what tomorrow, when you wake up, what it will be, and the impact it will have in terms of production. So to stop what has happened globally, because stopping global supply systems has produced huge inflation around the world, but also suffering, because countries like Africa, which didn't have capacity to have a stimulus package to go and print money, are suffering. And so this is again something that we must do everything possible to maintain normal economic activities, but by us following the best rules that will be able to contain this disease.
The fact that you're raising the vaccine intellectual property, and the question that also is hanging on many Kenyans, rafters of their minds, is the fact that some of these vaccines were developed right down here in Kilifi, Center for Geographic Medicine Research. So where is the stake for Kenya in light of intellectual property with the UK, as it were? Because we are not given to understand what share is this. They're developed here, they're taken back to UK, then we are supposed to actually be putting a pail in our hands, begging for these vaccines at the end of the day, yet we were part and parcel of the development of this particular vaccine. Even if it was funded by the Western countries, where is the stake also of intellectual property? I should throw that question to you, Ambassador, or Hashi as well.
Debal, I think the debate here is that we're pointing out the unfairness and the hypocrisy of our brothers in Europe and in the United States, the West. We are saying that they're unfairly doing something. And we're saying that we participated in helping in the creation of the vaccine to a certain extent. And therefore we deserve to get the intellectual patent so that we can create our own, we can create the vaccine. And this will help, as Peter has said, a global agenda, a global necessity. I put it to you that that's not how the world works. And I think the faster we realize that, that international relations does not work in this way, they're better for us. We as Kenyans or as Africans have a responsibility to our citizens. That's the first and foremost responsibility we have. We have the responsibility to make sure that they're healthy and they have security. And this global health problem did not come from us. It came from China. And one of the things that I've been saying on Twitter is that Kenya should not pay the Chinese loans. And the rationale is that you created this was not an act of God. As a Muslim, we believe everything is an act of God. But scientifically, this issue in China was not an act of God. It was created in a laboratory and they caused the pandemic. The Chinese are responsible for the global health virus problem. They have, we had to all hold them accountable and say, we have your loans. You gave us a pandemic. We are going to build our own vaccine. We need your help if you can give it to us. But we're going to use that money to build a grid and institutions that are going to help us inoculate our people. Tebal, we're going to an election. How are we going to go into an election without everybody being vaccinated? It's not possible because it will create a huge health problem. As you know, as a pandemic, it's the perimeters, the closeness, the close quarteredness that creates problems or infections. So I think that we need not to think outside the box, we need to think without the box and say, what responsibilities do we have? What is it that we can do? What resources can we bring to bear? And how can we negotiate with world powers on issues of loans so that we can free up money? You know, our deficit is huge, we know our debt is huge, we've been borrowing left, right, and center. I don't mind borrowing to build things and then paying later, but it has to create an economy that can pay later. So the issue, on the issue of vaccines, ad nauseum, the policy is not to go and tell the Europeans and the Americans, please help us. We must help ourselves.
Right, let's hear from Peter Biara-Jack. In light of also the waiver that was temporal during President Donald Trump's administration on the pharmaceuticals and intellectual property, how is that really panning out up to now? Yeah, was that also the temporal period that was given? Did it lapse or is still on? What is the development?
I think in terms of the narrative and the setting of conversation, a lot has changed here in the U.S. since the previous administration ended and Biden came to power. And I think that is part of maybe some of the things in our mind and some of the things that people are still stuck in how they're perceiving the evolution of this particular crisis. But I think within the U.S. here, the language is certainly supporting greater global solidarity and standing together than it was in the previous regime and administration. Now, of course, how that is playing out practically is entirely something different. But I think there is something very important here in this experience that I think would be worth holding on to when we eventually comes out of it.
Right.
Seeing how...
Yeah. Well, I think we've lost Peter Biara-Jack there. We shall continue pace with him on that particular note. But even in light of what Hashi was talking about, the Wahun lab being pointed as the place where this virus emanated from, there is the probability, right, that it did escape from a laboratory there. A secret U.S. intelligence report has discovered that the 3 scientists from the facility needed hospital treatment in November 2019 for COVID-like symptoms, countering the official line that the first cases happened a month later and were the results or they were the result of eating produce from a fish and meat market in the city. But the discovery that the scientists from the Wuhan Institute of Virology were displaying COVID-19 symptoms a month earlier suggests the laboratory was engineering bat viruses, and that one result, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which causes COVID-19, leaked from the facility probably that November. Around 200 scientists are demanding transparency and have called for an independent review of the evidence, especially after World Health Organization investigation failed to determine the origin of the virus. Even Dr. Anthony Fauci, that is the chief medical advisor to the president, is admitting the possibility that the COVID-19 pandemic, which has so far killed upwards of 4 million people and wrecked whole economies, was a man-made virus that leaked. He's also being accused of lying to Congress about the U.S. funding program that was bankrolling research at the Wuhan lab. And this is what doctors don't tell you, the latest magazine that really also reveals this as well. Let's just continue as we try and get a reconnection of that, and we wind up on this. We have the government right now also here in the country saying, yes, we need to go back to the factory settings as far as protocols are concerned, lest the country goes under another lockdown. And this is spreading fast and furious than the Delta virus. Ahmed Hashim.
Okay. Debal, you're quite right in saying that this virus was man-made. We Kenyans and we in this continent, and maybe the rest of the world, did not have anything to do with it. The responsibility of the Chinese Communist Party to make sure that its laboratories, which had produced Debal if you remember, SARS before, it was killing birds and bats in New York, and the birds were falling out of the skies. Sooner or later, Debal, this was going to develop into something completely different, and it did. They were playing around with these viruses, Debal, and I don't even believe that this thing came out accidentally. Debal, I think we ought to be very, very clear about the political economy of the virus. You know, there's a health issue to the virus, but there's a political economy to the virus. The virus has devastated our economies. It has devastated African economies, which were fragile in the beginning. It has devastated our populations because there are millions of people who have gotten the virus and maybe don't even know about it. We are lucky in a certain way here in Africa is that the pandemic has not reached the levels in which people thought that it was going to reach. But if the virus keeps mutating, this is a very critical point for people to understand. The virus mutates when half the population is not vaccinated and the other half is vaccinated. That is where the mutation comes from. And if we have this mutation from South Africa, it means that down the road there's going to be other mutations. And we're going to keep needing boosters, and we're going to keep needing, I reject that this virus should be a way of life for us. Smallpox was a way of life for us. Chickenpox was a way of life. But we found a vaccine against it. And we need to get a vaccine against this disease. And Debal, one of the things that we need to stand up to is the fact that we are not responsible for it, and there's someone else who's responsible for it. And therefore, that person has a natural responsibility to give back to the places in which people got hurted. And that's China, the second largest economy in the world. We have no right to pay these huge Chinese debts, even though the government signed for it, because the circumstances and the environment and the potentiality of us returning the loans was based on the conditions that there was no virus at that time. Now that the virus is there, it means our capacity to pay has receded. And Debal, I think that the government has to, have some, to use a Spanish word, I beg your pardon, some cojones, to stand up to these guys and say, no, And the second thing that we need to do is to call an emergency meeting of the Security African Union. You know, the African Union is doing nothing about Ethiopia. They're sitting there doing nothing. We want them to do something about the virus. We want governments to come in, even East Africa can come together and say, how can we make these vaccines here? It can be led and chaired by President Kagame, who's doing a fantastic job over these issues of the vaccines. He's got most of Rwanda vaccinated, most of them. And I think that we need to really have a public policy that is self-interested, that focuses on our own interests, because that's how the world is. We didn't create the international system, Debal. It was created before us with other people. So we don't want the virus rock to land on us, Debal. We want to land on the virus rock.
All right, back to you, Peter Biarajak, before also we take a short break. And then, yes, I hope you've not lost your track of thought.
Yeah, the point I was saying, Dubal, is that we need to also be very realistic about how we talk about the virus, how we think about solutions to it, and how we think about the existing global order, and how it is being challenged by the current age in which we are going through. It's not only the virus that is happening. There are so many things that are happening that makes it very clear that the current global order is in serious trouble and is no longer working, nor was it ever really legitimate. And I think the more things don't work out and the more this chaos is emphasized, the more that become evident. But then also, I'm not very sure also if there is a willingness and readiness to put together a new architecture. So the reason why I like the point that President Ramaphosa is saying is he's laying out the way Africa sees things and the way that we want to be treated. And the way that if we are serious about overcoming this challenge and addressing such global challenges, the kind of attitude that is required in how we treat one another. So that is very important. At the same time, also, we cannot behave like mafia. There are certain things that we cannot just do the way that other states do them. Of course, we know that there are states that are very ambitious and they are very obvious in how they exercise power, and they're very matter of fact about it. But there is also a need for decorum and respect in how we build faith in global institutions and how we do things, showing that the intent is good and what we want to accomplish is good. So I don't think there is really a need for people to arbitrarily do things at this point, but I think there's really a need to waive these kind of intellectual property rights and ramp up productivity so that we are able to really prioritize the investment into wherever each of the countries and the region have capacity. Because this virus is going to be changing. So there will be a need to be research in how the virus is changing and adapting the vaccinations and different therapeutic to the change that is happening. And then making that knowledge immediately available to everyone so that there is a ramping up of production. I think that is one way to look at it. Ultimately, I think the reason why I say we will have to accept to live with this virus is because it's mutating so fast. And I think, as I mentioned before, there has been over 1,000 different variances of coronavirus. It's just that the main one that infect the most people and that is spread faster are fewer. But it doesn't mean those are the only ones. There's a lot of them. So this virus over time, and as it's also spread, the lethality, there's really no evidence that it's becoming more lethal and more lethal. We saw a bit with Delta, but I think over time, it's just that it's spreading faster, but it's not necessarily killing more people. Even now, a lot of these cases, people don't have symptoms. So I think over time, it's something that people are just going to have to deal with, and we need to learn how to react and adjust to it and not be scared so much by it.
Thank you very much. Let's come back to Balozi Erastus on this as well, because I think we began with Hashi, but you are the one who highlighted the issue of the vaccine intellectual property. In light of what I'd asked and also what Peter Biara Ajaki is saying, kindly put the proper perspective as we wind up also on this particular subject. And then I'll ask you also one more question, maybe to also wind it up. Ghana is proposing to fine every airline $3,500 for unvaccinated passengers. What do you think about this particular, directive by the Ghanaians?
Thank you very much, Dibal. Let's go first to the question that has been raised about the COVID, its origins, the response in the world, and how we should. Dibal, I think there is science, and we must allow science to play out as science is a rule book is also concerned. And much as I respect Ashish, and we are good friends in this, I think we want to avoid a situation where we politicize an issue of this nature, and instead of focusing on really solutions, you divert your energy and start wars that don't help in addressing the challenge. I know that during the last elections in the US, some of the candidates there started saying this disease has come from such and such a place, and you could see there's no consensus in science. And I think I'll be careful to try and say it has come from this particular place. Even if it did, I think this is not the first pandemic we have had. We have had, the Spanish flu. We have all these flus. In fact, there are many. I remember at the bank we did a study of going back for 1,000 years on the flus and how the cycles play out. And as Peter said, of course, a pandemic starts with certain wave, very strong wave, but as mutation starts to take place, it loses its potency and starts to get less, but then it becomes now more or less endemic, but it's not something that is an alarming issue. And I think this is how we should approach it and start asking ourselves, where is the true science of it? And because the moment we do that, I mean, let's talk about for instance, climate change. We know that today we are suffering here in Kenya and all over the world. Rains have failed, droughts, we have floods and the rest. What is the problem? It is global warming. Who has caused it? We know it is those countries that have produced. But if we start pointing each other fingers, I think what we need to do is what we do today. What are the mitigation measures? How do we find a solution forward? Because a blame game sometimes only produces negative reactions. And of course, some of it is intended for what I could say, what has been said, is paternalistic approach. I mean, I remember reading a lot of literature on pandemics, but also, for instance, AIDS. When AIDS broke out, there were a lot of theories about it, where it originated and the rest. Today, nobody talks about it. And I think, I think let's look at the issues. But even the response, this is what you ask again about Ghana. The poor coordination of response. Waking up one morning, you announce this. In the evening, you announce that. You're now saying you are going to punish an airline. An airline has, first of all, an airline can only do certain protocols. If, say, you are going to Ghana, and the Ghana health rules require that arriving passengers must have a PCR test, no airline should board a person who doesn't have a PCR test. So that is simple. And I think if we all agree and use those rules, then there is no need. But then if you come out of such protocols and start imposing rules which others are not following, you then make it very difficult for proper and coordinated and rational movement. And I think what President Ramaphosa is saying, let us have conversations that are based on mutual respect, conversations that are based on facts, conversations that are based on us being at the table and also being regarded as part of the solution and not just orders, taking orders from the rest as he was implying.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. We want to take a short break. When we circle back, we shall also be looking at the Summit for Democracy that happened last week. Peter Jaros participated in that particular summit, also will give us a highlight of what really happened there that was chaired by President Biden. And what does democracy really mean in light of what we're going on